To me, one of the most important skills in hypertrophy training is rep consistency. This is something that isn't talked about enough here on YouTube because this is a very niche topic that is not particularly hot or trendy in the fitness world. But in my opinion, this is a highly underrated skill everyone seeking to build muscle long-term should aspire to include into their toolbox, given that bodybuilding is repetition work at its very core. Hypertrophy enthusiasts would be much better off perfecting what I refer to as rep consistency. Although physiologically impossible due to muscular fatigue, many people will do themselves a great favor if they strive to perform identical repetitions within a set. That means consistent tempo in each of the phases of a rep, same range of motion, body position, displacement of the load, etc., etc. This would be the ideal scenario, of course. The real world is quite different though. The reality is that as muscular fatigue increases over the course of the set, there is bound to be a slowing down in rep speed during the concentric phase, perhaps some shakiness here and there, a slight mechanical compensation, and even varying degrees of form breakdown. Our job is to minimize all this technique pollution, if you will, and strive to remain as truthful to our repetition standard for as long as we possibly can. However, there are many instances where this seemingly reasonable guideline could or should be ignored altogether, especially during isolation lifts. But when your own safety is at stake because the load you're using could literally crush you during compound lifts, then it would make sense to implement a more conservative approach that rather complies with the rep consistency skill I'm discussing today. If you're a person who actively seeks proximity to muscular failure at the gym multiple times throughout the week in order to create the stressful stimulus that would force a hypertrophic response in your body, then you're gonna benefit from developing some sort of rep consistency for the vast majority of lifts in your program. The way I see it is this. Form consistency is the ideal environment for us to establish standards in a given lift, and these standards let us, in turn, quantify our progress more objectively, especially when we implement expressions of progressive overload other than just weight increase, adding one single repetition to the total sets of an exercise, or simply completing the same workload with more reps in reserve are, indeed, forms of progression. I even go a step further in this direction. I'm going to argue that when it comes to hypertrophy, we are doing ourselves quite a disservice if we don't look beyond load increase when we try to quantify our progress. A heavier weight is the key driver in a sport like powerlifting, where the absolute load one can lift is all that matters. But bodybuilding is different. The goal is not to lift ever-increasing heavier weights, but rather to create a greater tolerance to muscular fatigue despite completing more work over time. Getting stronger is only a byproduct of this long-term adaptive process. Thus, when it comes to hypertrophy training, the possibilities to measure progress are much wider, from increasing frequency and tonnage through more reps and sets, to manipulating angles, technique, or range of motion to increase the difficulty of an exercise. If proximity to muscular failure is indeed the most important factor for muscle growth, we can accomplish this goal through different intensity ranges. For practical purposes, working between 8 to 15 reps could be the best option in most cases, although this guideline is by no means set in stone, and there might be instances where other rep ranges could be useful or even better. At this point, I would like to remind you that I took a deeper dive on the topic of rep ranges for hypertrophy training in the video that is about to pop up in the upper right hand corner of your screen. At the end of the day, all this means is that the load you use in a lift is important and should go up over time, of course, but the mechanical tension produced by this weight is not the only thing we need to take into account for muscle growth. As you can see in all the clips I'm showing you now, I'm purposely using a lifting technique whereby I'm trying to make myself weaker in the dumbbell incline bench press. I do not put total load in a pedestal when I train this particular lift, but I rather focus on reaching proximity to muscular failure, something which organically occurs somewhere around the 8th repetition. In hindsight, when I analyze all the incline bench press work I did in that session, perhaps I could have completed an extra rep in the first set. However, there is no room for speculation in the subsequent sets. The second and third are clear examples of sets taken to 0 reps in reserve. Had I attempted to perform one more repetition there without altering my technique, I would in all likelihood have failed to overcome the resistance, which is exactly what happens at the end in the fourth and last set. Among other things, I also believe that rep consistency does a pretty good job at telling apart a beginner lifter from people who've been in the trenches for years. When there is consistency, there is awareness. When there is awareness, there is intention. And when there is intention, the lifter makes every repetition as stimulatory and productive as possible. In other words, rep consistency also ensures that you're spending effective time in the gym for the goal of gaining muscle. Even more, the degree to which you can maintain rep consistency throughout the sets could point out to different shades of gray. An absolute beginner is likely to display total inconsistency in technique. His form is going to be all over the place and every repetition is going to look very different from one another. A late beginner is likely to showcase a fairly good degree of technique consistency up to the point where fatigue kicks in. Then the last few reps could differ to quite an extent from the ones performed at the start of the set. Someone who is no longer a beginner in bodybuilding could possibly maintain almost perfect form right until the moment of muscular failure. At this point, only rep speed will be negatively affected, and we would require someone with a very keen eye who might be able to spot minor technique deterioration. So both for the sake of your long-term muscle growth progress and safety, you would be doing yourself a massive favor if you were to shift your focus from just adding weight and seeking progression at all costs to paying more attention to how you do things in the gym. The more aware and consistent you become, the better you'll get at implementing the best hypertrophy-friendly technique for you. And by doing so, you'll ensure a much faster rate of gains. I know this because not so long ago I was on the team progressive overload by all means necessary. But here is the issue with that type of fixation. Being obsessed with numbers could and most likely will make you alter your technique and rep consistency for that matter, only for the purpose of getting the dopamine hit associated with a +1. But the truth of the matter is that this is only a shortcut. True progress in bodybuilding is in fact that +1, but within the context of a technique consistency that repeats itself in each and every rep throughout the entire duration of a set. Not a very sexy topic to talk about, very boring, repetitive stuff, but you can bet your ass it works. Despite rep consistency being a great concept in theory, in practice there are still some minor fluctuations in my technique from one day to the other. My medium-term goal would be to gradually reduce these to almost negligible levels so that when I see my own videos in the future, I get bored. And that'd be a great sign that I'm doing a good job at bodybuilding. I hope you found value in today's episode. Check out these 2 other videos, I think you're gonna like them. Please give me a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to choose all when you click on the bell to get notified every time a new video goes live. Stay fit, stay strong, help me raise an army of Super Saiyans all around the world. Peace.